So I've done martial arts for 20, 22 years now. I started when I was in high school. I always had like an interest in martial arts. I always had an interest in Asian culture. I will blame growing up in the 80s and Ninja Turtles specifically on all of that. So I started training in martial arts when I was in high school, and it's been like saved my life. Not in the sense that I've had to fend off some sort of weapon wielding attacker at any point, but it's just been like the rock for me through anything tumultuous that has happened pretty much in my adult life. And so I've always been very involved in that in some way, shape, or form since I started. Still with my original teacher that I started studying with, 22 years ago. And, I've had the opportunity to meet lots of amazing people through the practice of martial arts, both kind of in terms of their technical ability or just, stuff that seems unreal, but isn't. But, in the context of it's just amazing what humans can do. Also people that are just really good. Like one of my best friends lives in Kentucky. And I met him through the martial arts organization that we're both part of. And, I was in his wedding a number of years ago, and he's helped me out in a number of ways. He was coming up helping me with my house that my fiance and I bought last year, and helping me with the electrical work, among other things. So that aspect of it's been a super rich experience for me for a long time now. But kind of to your point about what my health and fitness as of, the last few years, I had gone, let's see, where does this start? Well, I had been super stressed out from working on GFDA in 2017 and 2018. My good friend and then business partner left the company, and I decided to kind of hunker down and keep going. Like when he left, that we had the discussion. The company was in debt, and it was like, okay, well, do we stop doing it? How does this separation breakup end up? And all of the complexities around that. Unfortunately, because we had and have a good relationship, there wasn't like a big blow up argument and then lawyers and all of the stuff involved that you would usually expect. It was fairly amicable overall. And so during that conversation, it was like, okay, well, we could just close the business down. You take half the debt, I have to take half the debt, and we just move on with our lives. But for whatever reason, for me, I just felt really strongly that there was still something left in GFDA and something that I wanted to explore. And not to get into all the details, but basically, I took on the whole company at that point, and he left, and so there was some debt to be paid off, and there was just a lot of work that had to be done for one person. And so, not that I didn't have help in a variety of different ways throughout that time period, but it really wore on me psychologically and physically. I was working a lot, and so. There was a really good Chinese restaurant around the corner from my apartments in the city. And I just ate there multiple days a week, sometimes twice a day, embarrassingly. So I had put on a little bit of weight. I've always been fairly svelte, so it wasn't like I had, hit any sort of major overweight or obesity, but more weight than I had ever had on before. And I kind of knew that was happening. And then I had a lump on my testicle, and it was like, oh, okay, well, now I really do need to go to a doctor, because that's nothing to fuck around with. I hadn't been to a normal doctor in over a decade, and it was like, okay, it's time to go. So I'm in my mid-30s. It's probably good to get a baseline on a bunch of different health metrics that I don't have. So I went and I did that. And when I went to the doctor, fortunately, the thing with my testicle ended up being no big deal. But in the taking the battery of tests and blood tests and so forth, they were like, well, you're a little bit pre-hypertension as far as your blood pressure, and you've got your cholesterol's a little high, and you're edging in on overweight. So it was just a lot of little markers you're not in a bad place yet, but you're headed that way. And, it was the first time I had been to a doctor. And so my new doctor and everything for me. And they were like, well, we'll put you on statins for the cholesterol. And I was like, what the fuck? Like, I'm 35. Like, you're not going to recommend diet and exercise, or I'm not like sailing my ship out like, oh, well, he's a lazy motherfucker. He's probably not going to do anything. We'll just resort to the pharmaceuticals. So I was like, no, I'm not going to get on statins. Like, absolutely not. Like, I'll fuck around. I'll change my diet, and we'll see what that does. And, we'll see if it's something that's more nature or nurture. So I went really strictly vegetarian, pescatarian, whatever it is, with fish for like half a year. And
fish is a vegetable.
Yeah, practically. The thing is, like, I really like sushi, so I wasn't going to be able to like totally give that up. So that was what I did. I pretty much gave up, red meat, chicken, all that. And, I did that for 6 months. And to some extent, I also like challenging myself with, a training regiment or a thing or whatever. And so it was like, all right, I can do this. So I did that. I got all my numbers down. I lost a little bit of weight, et cetera. But then kind of in the process of that, I'm also innately curious about everything. And so I started doing some reading. I started reading about like what current data says about cholesterol, and kind of stuff like that. And I had come across an all meat diet, and then I was reading, like I said, I was reading about the cholesterol, and it's like, okay, well, it's not exactly what everybody says it was. That's not the same correlation or causation between eating red meat and cholesterol and mortality and all this stuff. And I'm no doctor, but I was like, well, there's some interesting stuff online. I've watched a bunch of videos from both doctors and, for lack of a better term, like fitness influencers that are talking about this. And, eventually that popped up on like Joe Rogan and things like that. So I said, I'll give this a try for a few months. I'm going to do my own blood work by way of like Quest Diagnostics. That way I'm not hearing about it from my doctor. Like, oh my God, what are you doing? You're like murdering yourself. So I did that. What I found, anecdotally from my experience doing that was, it wasn't as hard as I thought. It was, so I went fully, just as a clarification, I went fully just meat. It wasn't as hard as I thought. It was actually kind of enjoyable. I felt really good doing it, at least after kind of the initial week and a half or so of my body adjusting. I lost more weight. My blood pressure dropped more. My cholesterol did go up again, but not as high as it had been. A whole bunch of other blood markers ended up being really healthy. My HDL was high. My triglycerides were really good. And I felt good. And my anxiety kind of like mellowed out. And so that was kind of like my experience with that. And I kind of like ebb and flow with it, in and out. Sometimes I'll go really seriously with it for 4 or 5 weeks, and then I'll kind of like back off and do a keto diet. And then in other instances, it just kind of like, free for all, which typically happens more like, in the summer. My fiance and I go on like a beach trip with her family, and it's, like I'll just eat whatever and then kind of get back to it. So I give myself a bit of a flexibility in that regard.
Yeah, that's cool. Did you listen to, I think it's the Human Performance Outliers podcast at all at any point in that process?
Yeah, that sounds really familiar.
It's Zach Bitter and this other guy who I want to say might have been the guy who started the carnivore thing. I forget his name off the top of my head. He's like a bodybuilder type guy.
Is it Sean Baker? Is it Sean Baker?
Maybe. I don't. Yeah, I'd have to look. I don't know off the top of my head. Let me look it up.
Yeah.
But when I was training for ultra stuff, I was a big fan of Zach Bitter because he had set the 100-mile world record. And so I found their podcast, and he's a big fuel or train low, race high kind of guy. So like low carb training, but then like carbs on race day sort of thing.
Yeah.
It was just really interesting to learn a lot about that. I did carb cycling and stuff for a while. Yeah. It looks like it is Sean Baker and Zach Bitter.
Yeah. Yep.
But yeah, it was interesting. I find that I don't know. I've really enjoyed the challenge of doing stuff like that for periods of time. I find that it gets like annoying over extended periods of time. And so it's like, I sort of go through phases of like, depending on what I'm doing and the like social scenarios I'm in, like trying to keep a healthy through line, but like not doing anything super extreme for too long.
Right.
But I had sort of like a similar thing where a few years ago, it was probably like 4 years ago now, I was like 260 pounds and was like, I just need to like do something about this. And like just started by like going to the gym, but then had to dig into like all the science and, you know, nutrition stuff and go full nerd on it. And so, you know, ended up going into like triathlons and ultra marathons and competitive CrossFit. And like, it's been a really fun journey. But I feel like it's one of those things too, like I'd be curious your thoughts, because I feel like I've learned so much and I've learned that like so much of what I grew up understanding about nutrition isn't true.
Yeah.
But I still have a hard time like there's some simple stuff that is true, and then there's lots of it that's really complicated, right? Like even to the like, you can go vegetarian and have a lot of great success. You can go all meat and no fiber and have a lot of success.
Right.
Like there's a lot more viable options than I think I was like taught when I was younger, but there's trade-offs to everything too, you know?
Yeah. I feel the same way, you know, and it's really interesting to me. I was just having this conversation with a friend of mine this morning, that there's so many people that I know and have been good friends with since, you know, I was a kid or, you know, high school, et cetera. And like, partly because I lived out of state for a while, and also partly because I'm usually very busy with, work and, you know, just life in general. I don't get to see them quite as frequently as I did when I was in my 20s, but like some of them still have this diet that I ate, you know, when I was 18, 20, 22, you know, that's like Kraft macaroni and cheese or like Chef Boyardee or, you know, just like random things that when I was younger, like I just didn't think about, like, oh yeah, you know, like I drink soda, like I drink a Coke, like at least one a day. Like that's normal. You know, and I've gotten so far away from that, and it's like pretty much everything that I eat, whether I'm on a diet or not, is like whole foods in some capacity. You know, it's like real fruits, vegetables, meats, not really much packaged or processed stuff. And, you know, with cooking, it's like I'll cook with sauces and seasonings, but that's about it. I don't really get into much else. But it's just like, it was kind of jarring. It was like with some of my other friends, it was like, oh, you like, I mean, it sounds really judgy, but to each their own. But it's like, man, you eat that? Like, you still think that's okay to eat? Like, it's so crazy.
Yeah.
And it's more just me reflecting on my own, you know, journey of what I used to eat compared to now, and you know what I thought or was taught. But yeah, the sugar lobby back in the 70s or whenever that was, they had a long-term impact. That's for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and I feel like that's one of the things that's like, even when I, you know, came into all of that, I think I was very much in the like carbs are always bad camp. And then as I got more and more into like the performance side of it, it was like, oh, this stuff, like there are tons of really high performance people that like, if you need fuel, this stuff is really good fuel. But then there are also, you know, trade-offs with like, being a super high performance athlete also isn't the healthiest thing necessarily. Yeah. So like, it's all like, what are you trying to do? But it was funny because I just remember, you know, I lost a bunch of weight and people were like, man, you must eat no carbs. And I was like, dude, I eat like 4,000 calories of carbs a day right now. Cause I'm like running 10 miles every day and lifting and like, you know, it's that whole like Michael Phelps eats like a 3,000 calorie pancake breakfast every day thing or whatever. And it's like, it's not that carbs are bad. It's that you are filling your gas tank and then sitting all day, you know,
right. Yeah.
Well, now that we have a full-fledged nutrition podcast,
from two guys that like have no fucking idea what they're talking about, really, by comparison.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm curious, like, because you mentioned sushi again too. Like, where did this deep Asian cultural interest thing come from for you?
Oh man, I think that it was just innate. I don't know. It's really hard to say. I think that it was probably like I said, like it really was kind of Ninja Turtles when I was growing up. I was big into video games, so there was a little bit of that from like Nintendo and Zelda, those sorts of things. When I was really lucky because when I was when I was young, my parents live very close to where both sets of my grandparents were. And so as when I got a little bit older, kind of, after kindergarten into, primary school kind of thing, during the summers, my mom had gone back to work, and she worked for like a Christian nonprofit for a long time. And so for, a handful of years until I was old enough to like be by myself entirely, I'm a spoiled, rotten only child. I would go, she would drop me off at one grandparent's house, and I would, every day, and I would be with the same grandparent for that week. And then the next week I would go to the other grandparent's house like every day. She'd drop me off, pick me up at the end of the day. And so I just alternated back and forth at my grandparents' house throughout the summers. And, my grandparents were both, on both sides of the family, were really involved with, my upbringing. And, they would take me places and have me try different foods and different cuisines. And, like on my mom's side, my grandparents would often take me down into the city. My grandfather, we would go park at the park and ride, which was not far from our house, and take a bus into downtown, like if you were, working downtown. And then we'd go out to lunch places or go to the Carnegie Museums, the Art Museum, or the Natural History Museum. And so I got like a lot of experiences that way. And, surprisingly, especially with my grandfather having fought in Okinawa in World War II, like he took me to the Japanese restaurant, which was in Station Square in downtown Pittsburgh, which is still there. I've had dinner there like once or twice in the last couple months with my fiance. And so I don't know. I think that there was like as a young child, there was a little bit of an esoteric nature to that. And among the different cultures that were presented to me in pop culture, that one just really jived for some reason. And as I got older and I got into high school, like I said, that was when I started martial arts, but I started with a friend of mine. A friend of mine had been training, and we were dating girls who were friends at the same time. So there was like 4 of us. And I remember like we used to drop him off during the summer to classes, and then, pick him up like hour and a half, 2 hours later. And then he'd like punch me or show me a joint lock or whatever. I'm like, oh, that's so fucking cool. Like, yeah, I want to do that. So a couple months later, I joined, and then he and I were training a bunch. And then shortly after that, he got a job at one of the only, at the time, Japanese restaurants in Pittsburgh. And then I started working there as well, which was actually owned by a Korean family. So it just like sort of happenstance. I had all of these different experiences that kind of like pointed me in that direction.
That's really cool. Yeah, I feel like it was. I mean, I think you're a little bit older than me, but I feel like generationally there was sort of this like wave, this like cultural. Like I remember even, I feel like my dad, we would watch a lot of like Bruce Lee movies and stuff, and it was always just this like very cool, mysterious sort of thing. Yeah, I always felt like I was sort of interested, but I never dug in that hard. Like I never went down, like I feel like the like anime and manga stuff is huge now, and like I never really got into any of that world.
Yeah, I hit that a little bit. I hit it very hard, but for a short period of time. Kind of also high school-ish. Nerd admission. My friends and I started the anime club at our high school. But
sick.
So that was like one of my first experiences at some sort of leadership role, which is hilarious in retrospect because that was that was a whole clusterfuck.
Well, it's interesting. It's funny, like the shadows of the future, the idea of like starting this community around like art and storytelling that long ago, and like sort of how that's like a little seed of, what even you're doing now. It's funny when I look at stuff in that in my past, that it's like, oh, that wasn't it, but I was like figuring it out. It was the beginning of sort of wrestling against it.
Oh man, for sure. Like I remember, to my interest in graphic design and like particularly print related graphic design, like books and magazines and posters and stuff, which, print's largely quote unquote dead these days. But I remember being like a little kid and absolutely fascinated at how like a magazine was produced. And like I used to draw all sorts of comics and cartoons, and like fold 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper, and my parents would staple them. And then there was like leftover cardboard boxes from like when my dad would get beer, like not the way that it is now, but just like the corrugated cardboard. So those would get like stuck to the outside as like a hardbound cover. And I remember like looking at what I produced and then like an actual book or magazine or whatever, and like aspiring to that, but like having no idea. And even with like, my parents had a dot matrix printer when I was particularly young, and eventually like a laser printer and everything, but just like not understanding as a child like how the printing could like make it to the edge of the page. Like I didn't, you're a child, so you don't think about like, oh, well, they don't make the printing to the edge of the page. They just print to a certain point and then they cut the page. Like,
yeah,
of course. But yeah, that's such a strong memory. I remember like, feeling the texture and everything of the paper and thinking like, how do they do this? It's like, should have been a Mr. Rogers episode or something.
I know. I think that's one of the things that's like, I don't know. I was very much like the kind of kid who like loved watching how it's made and loved, just like learning about all these different things. I was super into art. I was super into like World War II. I wanted to be a fighter pilot. And I don't know, there's just something about like the creation of experiences and like exploration and figuring out how things work that's so interesting to me. And I think it's something that's like, I don't know, I almost feel like it gets it's one of those things that just in the list of like, as you grow up, I feel like people sort of like lose perspective on the value of that in some ways, that it's like, oh, well, it just is what it is. It's just a print or it's just whatever. And it's like, these are all like little pieces of magic if you really are like paying attention,
Yeah.
And I think like even we did a project last year that was like this big training curriculum for a waste and recycling company for all their truck drivers. And like some people would say that it's lame. I thought it was super fun because I got to spend hours and hours and hours learning everything you have to learn to be a trash driver.
Yeah.
And like got to ask all the questions of like, how does this work and how does that work? And explain lockout, tag out to me on like a driver level and what's this procedure. And I don't know, I just think that stuff is so cool. And it's one of my favorite things about like what I've gotten to do is getting to go into places like a print shop and be like, okay, explain to me how all this stuff works.
Yeah.
Because I feel like it's all this stuff that when I was a kid, it was like that. It was like, how do you get this to go to the edge? How do you get this to like do what it does? And getting to just like get behind the curtain with people who are really good at what they do and be like, okay, explain to me how this works because that's so cool,
Yeah, for sure. That was one of the things so that like in being in design, before having GFDA and everything else, it was really interesting to me because like you're branding or you're making artifacts for all these disparate companies and you get to learn a little bit about all of them and ask those questions like, well, how does this work? How does that work? Why is your messaging this? Like what's all the thinking that goes behind it? And so I used to joke that it's like a professional ADD. It's like you get to make this stuff, but it's for all these different companies and corporations and missions and organizations.
Yeah. So that was actually one of the questions I had because, I read the book and the book is good. I would highly recommend it. But like there was a few things that were still unclear to me and maybe I just missed it. But like, did you guys ever get big into like client work or were you right into like, we're just making art and selling art or like, what's that journey been like?
That it's kind of like a side story that it wasn't included because it wasn't as important. And also because like when we started doing GFDA, we like both myself and Jason Bacher had our own like clients that we worked with as just individual freelancers. And it's just, how naive we were when we started, it was like, I'm doing stuff and he's doing stuff. And then it took us like 2 years to be like, well, we could do stuff together. We're like doing all this other stuff with GFDA. Like, oh yeah, we could like, share this work. And then, that did start happening. And so then we did start having client work. But then further with the client work, like we early on, like once we started actually taking on client work, then we would take client work on one of two ways. It was either like, well, we're just Brian and Jason and we're not good fucking design advice because of the obvious reasons, like people don't necessarily want to be associated with that name. Or if people did hire us for being GFDA, then it was usually under like a non-disclosure. So even though they were okay with who we were and our name and everything else, it was like well, it's a non-disclosure, so you can't talk about anything. And so largely, like, that's kind of why that stuff wasn't included. But we had done like a handful of work for some larger organizations and some of the smaller ones. Like we did a bunch of branding for a company, like a design company in Brooklyn called Beam, BEAM, which they've continued to grow and expand. And Beam was actually kind of an interesting case because they had come to us initially as like a wholesale client. So they were buying prints and mugs from us kind of in for us, the e-commerce heyday of like 2014, 2015-ish. And then when Jason moved to New York, he went and met with them in person. And then, we were continuing to sell to them, and we did like a holiday market where they featured a lot of our products. And they had kind of picked up steam as their company and brand were progressing. And then they wanted like a full branding suite. So we ended up like redoing their website and all of their brand materials, logo, etc. And so that was a good project. And that actually ended up in a book called Designer's Research Manual, which was written by one of our professors. And so there's like a whole case study about like the positive effects that we had on their growth and their sales, both in person and online, as well as their like more qualitative metrics. Like all of a sudden they were getting into magazines and blogs that they hadn't before, that they had kind of felt were out of reach. And that we felt was largely based on kind of a research process that we had done to communicate like who the owners were personally as part of the brand.
That's super cool, man. That's really, really cool. So like something that is always interesting to me is just this idea that there are many ways to skin a cat in many businesses. And I feel like art and communication and creativity is like a good example of that. Yeah. How did you go from like, I guess I would be curious to know your backstory, because I feel like for a lot of us, it's like, oh, you can draw or design or take photos or whatever. You should either go do weddings or go to school and make logos. Like there's sort of this immediate like service industry push a lot of us get to like go make stuff for other people. Yeah. And like, how did you go from that to being like, we're going to make this sort of brand art company ecosystem thing that's not all client work? Because I feel like most people don't ever make that turn. Right.
Well, I mean, for me...
What do you call GFDA?
I don't know. We've gone back and forth, Jason Richburg and I, multiple times over the last few years. So I'll answer that first, and then I'll kind of we'll hop into the time travel machine. Because like, when we launched the book, the goal was to kind of turn GFDA into like an events company, doing workshops on risk-taking as applied to creativity. We had done a number of events for some high-profile clients like Nike and Adobe. And then from there, like when we got the book deal, the goal with the book was to help us to get more of those like large scale corporate and I mean even smaller studio and agency clients. I mean we didn't really discriminate one way or the other. We just enjoyed doing that work. But the book came out at the end of 2019, and then COVID hit, and in that short interim, like between January and March, I mean we were looking at picking up multiple clients like all over the world for doing that. We were going to be in like Germany and South Africa and India, and like Facebook, Revlon, Monster Energy, all these people were contacting us after our book came out. We're like, oh my God, this sounds great. We would love to do this. So when that all kind of collapsed, then aside from the general disappointment that occurred, and kind of like waiting to see when are we going to be able to do this again? It probably took about 6 months until we were like in a place where it was like, okay, well, our events probably aren't going to come back. And if they do, they're going to look a lot different. And, who knows how long it's going to be. So we need to like switch gears. And so then we were working on like redoing the website and kind of repositioning ourselves with that as like a less major role. But then there's kind of always been this like, well, we do workshops, lectures thing. That's one bucket. We do this client work. That's another bucket. And then we've got the product sales. That's another component. And so like by fall of last year, when the website relaunched, there was still sort of this like three-way split between those things. But as we kind of got into the holiday season, for me, it was like, it became more and more clear. It's like, we need to focus specifically on one thing, and that needs to be the e-commerce stuff. And then the other ones, we'll see what happens and what comes along. But like my sense was kind of looking at some of the user data and analytics from the website is like, people are arriving at the website and they don't know what the fuck we are. And I want them to come and have a good experience, but it's like, I need them to spend money on the website, because if we're not generating revenue from this, then we can't keep doing what we're doing. So like, then that like, was kind of live, like as we had launched the website, like making constant changes, like, okay, this needs to feel a little bit more clearly like an e-commerce store. We need to change how the navigation works. We need to change how we're communicating this information. My dog just showed up. Say hi, Nico.
Puppy. Hey, Nico. So, like, that's interesting to me, because my brain from the outside would go, okay, we have sort of these, 3 or 4 funnels. In my own experience, it's like workshops for people like Nike and stuff sounds like a way lower overhead, bigger fish to fry
100%.
thing to focus on than physical good e-com. So I would be like, well, fuck posters.
Right.
I'm just going to go train other creatives. So why do you go into the thing that's like, let's ship 5 million posters a year?
Well, because nobody's doing events. Like, I think that like Apple, Facebook, Google, I think most of them haven't even got back to the office yet. And, the people that we've talked to, like we get like a little like inquiry here and there. And most people are, they're like, oh, well, if we do this, it's going to be highly restrictive and, like all of these like safety measures. And it's like, yeah, that's all well and good. But, like the way that our workshop is designed and why it's effective is it's like, it's in person, it's up close and personal. It's like people working and building and doing things with their hands, like shoulder to shoulder and, that kind of experience. And, like we could do other stuff, but like that's it. What we created and what we ran worked well. And we got very good feedback and very good outcomes from the companies that we worked with. And so we kind of weren't willing to compromise. And so it was like, well, if we could. The other problem with that, as for us, was like, this is a kind of a multifaceted issue, because the profanity in the brand has been an issue, and so that means that we couldn't advertise anything that pointed to our website. And so that was kind of an issue with the workshop. Now, there's workarounds for all of these things, but I'm just kind of giving you like the global view of like, of issues. So, and it wasn't clear to us like pre-COVID, like I hadn't really invested the time to understand how we could market and like the funnel process to get people to, come to us for those high ticket items. I think that now I have a better idea of how we would accomplish that. But, the people that we did get were, everybody that hired us for a workshop was because somebody in their organization had one of our posters. And so the way that I was looking at it was like, well, the product sales aren't really costing us anything. If anything, we make a little bit of money off of it. And we can't do traditional advertising. So this is kind of like our advertising. So as long as we get this out to people, it's not costing us anything. Then it's, leading to these larger ticket things. And we would get like a handful of them a year, which was good enough at the time. But but with those, like the income was like, so like, oh, all of a sudden you've got a shit ton of money this month. And then it like trickles down. And then you get to a trough 3 months later and you're like, fuck, like we really need to land another workshop client. Like, what do we have in the pipeline? And so that sort of very tumultuous experience was like, grates on you, it wears on you psychologically. So part of the thinking was, at least over the last 6 months, is like, okay, well, let's build up the e-commerce end of things. Let's make that super stable. Let's really get a good handle on that and a process and a good set of products. And let's start figuring out how to drive more people to the website. Let's figure out how we can own our audience rather than relying entirely on the whims of the algorithm and social media, which continues to fuck us left and right. And, let's try to get off of the tit of that. And then, then we've got like a stable income that we can count on any given month. Oh, there's the dog. And
hey, Nico.
And then, as we get that stabilization, then we can, if we get events, then that's like gravy on everything else. Here, let me put him in the other room so we don't have noise.
I don't mind. It's up to you.
He'll just like, if I stop petting him, he'll just like whine and whine and whine. So come on, bud. This is very, very real life here.
Oh, what a cute boy.
Yeah, he's blew out both of his knees like about 2 months ago. So he's finally getting surgery on Monday. So he's kind of been limping around. He's young. He's only 5. So he's usually full of energy, running around and everything else. And, now he just has to hobble. One went and then the other pretty quickly thereafter, before we even able to get him in to see a doctor. And then once he saw the doctor, it was like, oh, he probably blew out his knees, but you're going to have to wait for a surgery consult. We're like, well, how long is that going to take? 7-8 weeks. Like, fuck. So finally had that. And so now he's scheduled for surgery. But anyways.
Sorry to hear that, man.
Yeah. So where did I leave off with all that? So yeah, I guess it was what I was saying was have the baseline of e-commerce as, something that we can count on and have like clearly established. And then, everything else we can build off of that as with some stable footing.
Right. Well, I think the thing that sticks out to me about that is this idea of I had sort of a similar experience with COVID where I was focusing on like this sort of like high ticket roller coaster, like travel cinematography work that it was like, okay, I'm going to go like work for 4 days at a time, make a bunch of money, sit around for a while and then like take off. And then COVID just killed all of that. And so in many ways it was like, okay, this stuff is a big opportunity. But I think the blessing of COVID for a lot of people who were ready for it is like, okay, we now have bandwidth freed up to work on all the bottlenecks that we've ignored by being relatively successful the last period of time. And so that's where I was like, I'm going to go learn all this other stuff that I just know I've been sort of sleeping on like my own marketing side, the communication side, the business side, the bookkeeping side. I'm going to finally get like all these things squared away. And the last few years of that, I feel like has put us in a really good position for like where we're headed now. But that idea of like, okay, the workshops work. The workshops are a big opportunity. The workshops work for the format and the platform. And so like we could spend a bunch of effort trying to like fix something that already works to adapt it, or we can wait for it to come back. And in the meantime, we can work on something that's going to work whether that comes back or not. Feels like a smart decision to me. And that idea of like there's sneaky marketing to it. There's all these other things that sort of feed into the bigger puzzle we're trying to build. I don't know. I think that's really cool and really smart. I mean, I would imagine it's really complicated being in the whole physical goods e-commerce world.
Yeah, it's way more complicated than it used to be. I feel like, we were really fortunate when GFDA launched and we got all these requests for products and, we entirely relied on the viral nature of our content. And so we didn't have to do anything for the first 4 years. Sales continue to increase regardless of what we did. And, there in retrospect, of course, there's a ton of missed opportunities, but now, you can't see it, but in front of my computer is I've got all these Post-it notes as I've been trying to figure out okay, how does e-commerce actually work now? And getting a stronger understanding of it because, on one hand, I've run an e-commerce business, theoretically speaking, for 12 years. But on the other hand, I haven't focused on it for 6. So there are some things that I know kind of like really well, and then other things that you would expect somebody that's like, had 1 year of experience recently be like, well, why don't you know that? Like even up until fairly recently, like maybe a year or two, like I really didn't understand what the way that funnels worked. And so it's kind of like, that's been one of those things where it's like, okay, well, how do we get that to work? What's the process? And, even with, as we're moving forward in the next few months and coming out with some safe for work product lines, that will allow us to do some advertising finally on Facebook and like capitalize on that. So I'm really curious as to how some of these other methods of driving traffic to our site and, getting sales can work for us.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, I feel it feels very similar to me of like I've been, making content for people for over 10 years, but I feel like the last few years was like, I'm going to sit down and like really learn a whole bunch of stuff about all the algorithms. I'm going to really learn a bunch of stuff about like engagement. And because there's all these things that, get thrown around that I think I take for granted. And the more I learned about it, the better I feel like it all feels. And the more confident I am to actually like point people at things we can do that maybe aren't the most common paths, but like they still tick all the right boxes, which I think is one of the most fun things of being creative. But like, it's interesting because it's interesting to me, I guess, because like you guys have a big audience. You have like over 500,000 followers on Instagram.
Yeah, right about.
And you've got products, you've got an established brand. And I feel like there's this big narrative that's like, if you get an audience and you have e-com, you just print money. It's like quote unquote passive income. It's like as long as people follow you and you have something to sell them, you'll be a millionaire.
Yeah, so wrong. It's so wrong. Yeah, I think that we've made a lot of mistakes in that sense, and I think that is the common view that a lot of people have, and because I know for a fact that there are people with a fraction of our audience that make exponentially more than we make. And I think that we became very focused, again, because we weren't necessarily looking at it in terms of product sales. We became very focused on follower growth and engagement kind of shortly before our book came out, because we felt like that was a good way of reaching people to inform them about our book. And obviously we were very successful in growing our audience because we grew it from, when we got the book deal, I think we had like 25,000 followers in 2017, 2018. And then by the time the book launched, we were like around 80, and that was the end of 2019. And so here we are like 3 years later at like 500,000. But then, the algorithm has changed multiple times in the last 3 years, various permutations. And the most recent change, whatever it was, kind of like late October, early November, has basically totally stunted our growth. So, again, no advertising. So all of our growth is 100% organic. And we were getting to a point where we were tacking on like an easy 20 to 25,000 new followers every month, like net. And basically since December, we've been like completely flatlined. So that's been frustrating, but it's also kind of been a realization, which, as I was mentioning earlier, in terms of like owning your audience, it's like, okay, well, I don't want to be at the whims of social media, and we already experience a good deal of censorship for the profanity, and censorship seems to be something that continues to become ever increasingly prolific in social media spaces. So it's like, it would be unrealistic to think like, oh, that'll never touch us ever, for a variety of reasons. So it's like, well, okay, well, what can we do what can we do about that? And also, like, if our goals for success are, at least one of the goals for success has to be financial stability of the business. So we can't place that goal underneath followers and engagement, because otherwise we'll have all the followers and engagement in the world, but then like we can't keep doing what we're doing. So then it fails. So, even in just like the last month, we've been incorporating products into the Instagram feed. And so now we're posting twice a day with our content at noon, and then, either an associated product or just any product a couple hours later, usually at like 3 or 4. And of course, we don't get the same engagement on that. And that has, to some extent, damaged our already hampered engagement. But we've increased sales. And now people are more familiar with the fact that we have products. And it was interesting because the way that you and I kind of got connected is I also committed to like, okay, well, I need to reach out and start talking to people who are engaged with the brand, because I need to shed whatever ignorance and arrogance I have about like how people perceive us and what people want from us. And, some of like a lot of the feedback that I've gotten both from like mentors and experts and customers is like, well, you look at your Instagram feed and you don't see any products. So how does anybody know that you have a product? And of course, in my head, it's like, well, if you just click on a post and you read it, like as you swipe through, it shows a product. And like every day we say like, we have a product, but like everybody has said that, not everybody, but a lot of people have said that on both sides of the spectrum. So it's like, okay, like take a dose of humility here. It's like, okay, you got people that are making more money than you with less followers, and your followers saying like, oh, I didn't know you sold stuff. Like, okay, that's a problem. We need to fix that.
Well, and I think you've also got some level of like, because, okay, I'm just going to say this, and hopefully it's not offensive. I struggle with this idea of like, so there's this idea that I think we think of a lot of time that's like lateral expansion. So we want an audience, we want eyes, we want organic growth, we want numbers to be moving up. But as you mentioned, like sometimes sales and engagement are actually tradable metrics. They don't necessarily rise together like we would think they would initially. But so like for the GFDA feed, you need to create a deep enough connection with enough of that audience that there's a motivation for them to get something more than the free daily advice that's designed well, that's getting delivered to their feed, right? It's like, okay, so why would I codify this or get a physical representation of this or whatever else? Because it's like, I think about this sometimes when people are like, oh, I have like this meme page that posts Nike shoes and has 4 million followers. And it's like, great, but can you do anything with that? Like, it's sort of like, it's a cool number, and that's not bad. Like if you just want to like share advice with the world, you can get it out to 500,000 people. But now you're getting to the question of, well, now how do we drive behavior out of those people that allows us to capture some amount of, I think of it as like equity harvesting almost, that it's like you create brand equity, and now we want to like create this like deep brand equity, and then we sort of skim off the top of it, right? And that like a lot of the times the unfortunate wake-up call is we have really broad equity and it all goes about 2 inches deep. And like I ran into this when I used to run a film Facebook group, and we had like 3,000 members. People were booking tons of jobs and buying and selling gear, and like it was a lot to manage. And I remember being like, hey guys, if we made this like $5 a month, like we could make it awesome and it wouldn't burn me out. And everyone was like, yeah, no, it's not worth it. Like Facebook groups are supposed to be free. I ended up shutting it down. But I realized that like, it wasn't that it wasn't valuable. It was that I just had like not done a good job up front of establishing value, and then like everyone had gotten used to getting all the things that they valued for free, and then trying to turn that corner was tricky. And so it's like something that as I've gotten back into some of this stuff has been like, okay, how do we set it up from the beginning so that there's like content and there's free content and there's stuff that's valuable, and we're like doing a good job of communicating like what the value propositions are. And so like that's even something that like when we were talking about this new podcast or whatever you want to call it, is like what we're talking about doing now is going like, okay, let's do all these like really cool interviews, and instead of doing like a weekly Joe Rogan type drop, we do like 5 days a week, we drop snippets that are free, and they go to Instagram, TikTok, everything. And so we're feeding sort of the awareness thing. But then maybe the only way to get the full interviews is behind some sort of Patreon-esque, you want the rest of the story, this is what you have to do. And it's like, okay, we're giving away tons of free content. We're giving away tons of stuff that's valuable to the people who are doing interviews, because they're still getting tons of brand awareness out of it. And like, it's all super shareable, but we're holding the stuff that's like for the small percentage, because I think that's something that I've also had to come to realize is that like conversion rate problem, right? Of like, okay, so the more and more people you get, the number of people who are going to drop like really high, it's like a pyramid. that it's like the bottom keeps getting wider, but the top stays pointy. And so it's like, okay, we only have so many people who are going to give us like a ton of workshop money or like sell something, but those true fans are really valuable, and we need to give them opportunities to engage with things. And that's where like I've been a fan of your stuff. I wanted to support your stuff, and I was like, I'm going to go buy, 3 posters and 2 signed books and whatever else. But I think that question of like, okay, if you're not like, I'm going to go drop a couple $100 to support these guys, like why, what's your motivation to spend money here?
Yeah.
And that's something that we've tried to think about, where it's like, I don't know, because I think the advice is great and the prints are great, but when everything is just sort of a physical representation of something that's already free digitally, I think it's an interesting problem you find yourself in, I guess is just what I would say.
Yeah. Well, and I think that the, at the moment, we lack a diversity of products. It's like which is what we're trying to address in like the next 2 to 3 months, is, expanding that and doing some things that are a bit more dynamic with the content, in terms of things like greeting.
But you also sort of have a million products. Like how many actual prints? How many versions of the advice do you have?
So there's like 180 to 200 like written paragraphs. There's like 500 pieces of advice. Of those 500, we've got somewhere in the realm of shy of 200 that have written content that goes with it. And we're releasing, every day we like go through and we're releasing that. So we're actually almost done with that. We will be done with all of those 180 in 3 different colorways, like in the next 4 or 5 weeks, maybe less. And then we'll be, Jason, who I work with is writing more, but it's like, obviously you're not going to have a brand new one every day, et cetera. So yeah, that's, we'll have, 180 times 3 colorways of that content in that specific form.
Right. Well, and I feel like what's hard about that is like, even for me, it's like I have 3 of them on my mantle over here. And it's like, I would love all of them, but I only have so much wall
100%.
space.
Yeah. And I felt that way.
And like, I get anxiety around like, which ones do I pick? Because they're all so good.
Yeah. Thanks.
Oh, you're welcome. Have you guys ever thought about doing like, this is just a crazy off the top of my head thing, but like one of those like old school, like tearaway calendars that it's like a daily... Yeah. That would be sick. I would buy that. That
is on my high-level list of things to do. The issue with that at the moment is when we signed our book deal, we have our agreement says that we cannot produce any bound materials, of which a calendar like that counts, for a period of 3 years from the publication of the book. Yeah, because basically what they don't want is other products that we make that compete with the sales for the book. So technically speaking, that would be this coming January, we would be able to offer that product. And in fairness, like we got a really good, in our contractual negotiations for the book, we got like one of the best, like, cause we have a book agency that represents us. In that process, they said, basically we negotiated the best possible deal for flexibility with products that we've ever done, for that. So unfortunately, the calendar is like the one thing that falls into that like we can't do until, December, January. Yeah, I get it, but it's like they also don't want you publishing another book or anything in the meanwhile, because that's kind of like, I guess, the first 3 years are kind of a bread and butter period for getting their return on that investment.
Right. And God forbid you guys try and build like any more brand equity that would cause more people to buy.
I know. But, other things I think, like I agree with you. And that's been one of my concerns is like, we're such a print centric company. For a long time, it was like, well, we only had like 5 or 6 different prints before we started producing this daily advice content and then making them into prints. It's like, well, how many prints are you going to have in your home, office, studio, dorm, apartment? And then how many of those prints are you going to put up that have profanity on them, right? Like it's a dwindling number, but so that's really caused us to think about, products in a couple different ways. So, like apparel is one thing. Like in previous iterations, we've done shirts. So those are going to be coming back. Some of the feedback I've gotten from people are for things like socks, which I think is a really interesting. I hadn't really thought of it this way, but somebody had mentioned like, I would love to have socks that have the advice on it. So I have like, the different advice that I need every day, like 7 days worth of socks that have like whatever reminder. And it's like, that's even something, even with the profanity, because of like how it's situated is like, you don't necessarily see it. So it's like one of that thing that's like for you.
Right.
And then
that'd be a great gift too. Like a week of good fucking advice. Socks would be like a great Christmas gift.
And greeting cards is something else that we're very focused on, because so many of the pieces of advice are, motivational, aspirational, and could be applied to things like, graduation or, stuff like that. So those are kind of some of the key items that we're thinking about and in the process of developing.
Is there a world where you would ever, because I guess like the thing that strikes me is like, to me, I totally understand the like safe for work thing. And I mean, I had that conversation with Mandy where I was like, I'm going to put 3 posters that all say fuck on them a lot on the wall. And so like, I'm sorry when your nephews come over. But there is some element of like, I think that's part of what makes the brand special to me. And so it's like, how do you maintain that? And I get this sense of like, some people, are comfortable displaying it, but then some people maybe insularly. And so like, I was almost thinking, what if you even did like, like they have those like mass texting apps now? What if it was like a daily text of advice and you pay $1 a month or $2 a month or whatever it is to be on the list, that like we just text you a piece of advice every day, and maybe then you go, okay, we're actually going to stop sharing all the advice for free on Instagram, and if you want to keep getting it, here's how we're going to send you your daily advice. And then it's like, it's private, it's low overhead, it's scalable, low ticket, but also like if you capture even 10,000 of your 500,000 people or less than that, like that adds up on some level pretty quick too.
That we are 100% working on that right now. Everything that you just said, yes.
Perfect. I'm here to just give you all your good ideas, but pretend.
That's fine. Send me an invoice.
It'll be 10% of the annual recurring revenue of this text.
Right. Which at the moment is 0.
Perfect. I will take my negative
Excellent.
10 cents.
So I just I'm in the process of working with this company called Via, which is a two-way SMS platform for e-commerce businesses. And the primary thing that they do, and they've grown. They started I want to say 2019 or early 2020, and they were originally going to be a two-way messaging platform for restaurants, but then because of COVID, like all the restaurants closed. So then they pivoted, and I think they're valued at something like $250 or $500 million now in like less than 36 months. So I mean, kudos to them. But they have a really great platform, and the primary way in which people are using it as an e-commerce business, which we will use, is like marketing. So I'm in the first month of setup with them, where because there's all sorts of restrictions that you have to abide by with SMS or MMS for that matter. And one of the things I have them looking into is I don't know if you can text people profanity like from a company. Right, exactly, because of like some FTC thing, and it's also
even if it's opt-in.
That's what I'm trying to find out, and even with that opt-in stuff,
can you just make everyone sign a waiver?
Well, then if somebody sues me, that's like $5,000 per violation. That so then if you get like
have you seen that? Man, that stuff's like that stuff drives me up a wall sometimes because like I get it, but it's also obnoxious. Have you seen are you familiar with Liquid Death?
Yes.
Like they have a like sell your soul thing you have to do to like get into their like marketing club. I wonder if you could do something like that that's like a like sell your soul waiver, that it's like it technically is like, will you absolve us of whatever we send you, yada yada yada, by submitting this, you acknowledge yada yada yada, and then it's like, okay, send, and that's part of like the agreement, especially if it's a paid buying thing. I don't know if that's what you're gonna do, but like because I feel like you can't possibly be like, oh, you can't. I don't know. It just seems crazy.
Yeah.
Maybe it's true, but it seems crazy that they would be like, you can't do that.
I know. Well, I mean, it has nothing to do with the company. It has to do with just whatever the regulations are from the FTC, which again, maybe it is.
Right, which means
is
you
fine.
you can put porn online for free, but you can't sell an F word on people's cell phones.
It's the story of my life, man. But yeah, no, we would love to we'll have the usual targeted marketing and ad ban and cart, all that stuff for SMS. And the data on that is just ridiculous, like how well that you get opens and conversions, especially compared to newsletter and definitely compared to social media, which is practically zero. Having the advice as something that you can get daily and pay for, and potentially offering like two different tiers, one that's with an image and one that's just the text, is something that we're thinking about, and kind of, again, because it's like, it's actually not cheap to do that. I mean, it's a couple cents per text message, which doesn't sound like a lot, but if you like our newsletter right now, we send out pretty much daily, and that doesn't really generate a return. That's going to have to change because all of the newsletter companies are eliminating their unlimited sends. And so as it stands right now, like we're with MailChimp, we're going to move to Klaviyo in the next few weeks. It's pretty much impossible anymore to have unlimited sends. And so for us, it's like, we've got a mailing list shy of 30,000 people, and you get like, for our plan, you get like up to 300,000 sends. So it's like, well, 10 days, you're done. Like, that's it. And then we're paying a substantial amount of money to send emails out to people for free. So yeah, it's kind of like, well, how do we, we've got to change how we operate with that. So trying to come up with something that's reasonable, like, $5-10 a month, and also utilizing that to incentivize sales. So it's like, all right, well, you can pay, like, let's just make up a random scenario. Like, okay, it's $10 a month. You get daily text messages with an image. But then also we'll give you a $10 coupon that's good for our store. So theoretically it could be free, but then you're also incentivizing like a purchase. And so you're not really losing that money. It becomes worth it ultimately to do that, because there's nothing we sell that's only $10. So, but yeah, that's kind of been the sales and marketing aspect that I've really been trying to educate myself and think through with this, which is like, okay, well, how can we get people to engage with our brand in a way that's financially healthy for us?
Right. Yeah, man, that's so cool. That makes sense. But yeah, I mean, I've had the same experience where it's like I started looking into some of those text message platforms because I have some, similar related ideas. And it is like, if you've got a healthy business, it's totally justifiable. But if you're trying to figure it out, it's like some of that stuff is an investment, to get into like email newsletters at scale or text message platforms at scale. Like there is a not insignificant cost to a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, and that's kind of been, we're offering the print on demand for all the daily advice stuff right now. But in the long term, medium term, I'd like to get off of that because the profit margins are so narrow. It doesn't allow us to do a lot of things that we need to be able to do to scale the business. And it's kind of like it's working really well right now, but in the sense that, we've got this wide array of products available. However, for instance, it really impacted us over Black Friday weekend because the most that we could offer as far as like a percentage discount, I can't remember if it was 10 or 15%, which like basically eviscerated any profit margin that we had on a lot of the products we were offering at the time. But at whatever that number was, again, I forget, it was not enough to incentivize people to buy. And in talking with some other people who have like had e-commerce businesses for years, they're like, oh yeah, like let's just say it was 15%. Like 15% isn't enough to get people out of bed for like the Black Friday weekend. And, even for us, like we never offer sales at this point because I feel that it devalues the brand. So it's like very, very rarely, because otherwise you end up like J. Crew, like I buy some clothing from there, but it's like it's always on sale. So it's like, why would I ever pay full price? Like you just train the customer to like not value it for what it's worth. So yeah, like we had compared to previous years and percentages, et cetera, it was just like not a good holiday sale. And you live, you learn, you figure out like, okay, well, we need to increase the cost of our product, which I don't think is entirely reasonable given a variety of factors, or we need more margin in order to offer those discounts, but also to do any other things, because we can't have like a spring cleaning sale, or you can't offer like, buy, 3 prints, get 1 free kind of deal, because it's just, you just eat up all of the money that you're making. So it's an interesting problem. And by interesting, I mean, it's a pain in the ass.
Yeah. It's funny. Yeah. It's funny how that works. And that's like, I feel like that's something that I've really been looking at, is like, what are the opportunities, but also what are the opportunities with enough margin in them that we can sort of like use them to get other stuff up to speed, because it's like and that's, I guess, part of why I was curious about the e-com thing, because it's like, I would love to do physical stuff at some point, but even I was talking to a buddy and he was like, if you're going to do like physical stuff, you should do like really short run, limited edition collaborations with existing brands. That's like, we have 100 of these or whatever it is, like do a quick drop, sell them out, go like higher ticket with them. He's like, you don't want to have an e-com store open all the time right now. He's like, it's just not, for where you're at, it doesn't seem wise. And I think that's probably true. But yeah, so that's something we've been trying to figure out, is like, what are like really high value partnerships we could do with storytelling, and content and everything put together to tell the story of like, even like a small theoretical example we were playing with is like, a buddy of mine is doing a thing in July where he's like running this loop of a lake every hour for 24 hours. And I was like, it'd be really cool. Like, that's something I've always wanted to do. I was supposed to run a 50-mile trail race last year and couldn't because of COVID. And like, to go back and finally do that, but to do it, like to partner with like a local like sneaker customizer and make like Challenger sneakers, do the event in them, do a video on the event, and then be like, we have like 10 other pairs of these available if you're interested in this story or whatever, but like do this sort of storytelling event, merchandise, cross promotion event that's like also a partnership with someone else, which is really fun sounding to me. The logistics of it and like actually making it work are a whole nother conversation, but I just think that kind of stuff is really cool. And even like that Mason Kitsune thing you guys did, these sort of like little crossover partnership things are they seem fun. I haven't done one, but they seem fun.
Yeah, the Mason Kitsune one was good. It was the first like crossover partnership that we've done. Really in a couple of years. We had done some back like 2015, 2016, which I think we had some mild success with. We have got a couple more that we're doing this year, and it's kind of like it's definitely been like a learning process, especially the Mason Kitsune one in a good way. Like, I don't have anything negative to say about them, but it's definitely like some of the products that we made, like I'm happy with, but like we didn't push the envelope enough on what we developed and what compared to like what we wanted versus what they wanted. And I think, it was a little bit on our end when we started the conversations with them early last year. Like, I was in a very different headspace with GFDA, and it was like, oh, this is just such a great opportunity. And like, I kind of was like, I'm a very flexible person in general, but it was like, oh, there are some areas in which we should have pushed back because I think we could have done better work. But I mean, it's just like, it's a good learning process, and they were good for the experience. So we're doing a pen with a company called Baron Fig. They're based out of Brooklyn, New York. I've known the owner Joey for a long time, and we kind of when Jason had moved to New York, Jason had connected with Joey, and then we had gone out a couple times, and kind of lost touch in the last few years. And then even back then, like 2015, we had talked about doing a collaboration because they had just started their business a year or two earlier. And then, I don't know, somehow we got reconnected again, like in the last 8 months or so. So we're doing a pen with them, which I'm super excited about. I actually have just like confirmed designs and files and all of that earlier today. And then Ricardo Gonzalez, we did a collaboration with him. He's It's a Living. We did a collaboration with him in like 2015, which was also in collaboration with Beam that I mentioned that we had done the branding for New York Design Week. We did these giant, I think they were like 4 by 6 foot posters that sold. We did like an edition. We did like 3 different ones with him and 3 of each. And they were so expensive. That was like a little bit too much high end. They were just too highly priced. I mean, one, the cost of production was so high. And then, for us to make anything off of it, it had to be even higher. And so I think that we had kind of, outpriced ourselves from the vast, like 99.9% of our audience. I still have one of them in my basement. Probably do some sort of giveaway at some point. Genevieve Gordard, though, did buy one of those prints, who's like a HGTV person. So that was kind of cool. And Jason hand delivered it to her house. But this time with Ricardo, we're not going to make that same mistake. So we're working on like a couple different products, which will be much more reasonably priced and also much more reasonably sized. And so I'm excited about that. And then we're working with a guy who's kind of been a mentor to me, Simon Whitehouse. He used to be the CEO of JW Anderson, which is under the LVMH banner. He's currently CEO of a company in Europe called EcoAge. But he's got his own little side project company called EBIT, which is Enjoy Being in Transition. And it's kind of like a fashion, mental health thing. It's kind of like hard to describe, but it's all about like, life is like a constant series of transitions from one thing to another. And it's like, kind of enjoy the journey messaging. So we're doing some content with him, as well as looking into offering NFTs for the first time with those. It's kind of like dip our toes into that realm and see how that works out. And then donating a portion of the proceeds from both the physical products, because like everything, we'll do the posters, but also with the NFTs to some mental health organizations. We haven't picked out any yet, but we're looking at some both here and abroad. So we're hoping like all of those to will continue to help us to like grow and to expand into different audiences. Yeah,
that's super cool, man. That's really, really cool. I love this. We need to do this again. I want to be sensitive to your time, but I have a whole nother list of things that I would love to dig into sometime. Do you have time for like a 4 or 5 questions?
Yeah, sure. I'll do my best to be concise, but we'll see.
Well, perfect, because they're questions that are sometimes hard to answer quickly, but whatever you can do is fine. Okay, I have some incredibly powerful questions ready, and I will start on your signal.
Ready, set, go.
Perfect. In an increasingly Canva world, why does design matter?
Define Canva.
Oh, great question. It's some Photoshop app thing people use online.
Ask the question again. You're going to have fun editing this.
I guess maybe like... No, that's fine. I think maybe like a better way to ask the question is like, in a world where good, like decent is very accessible to everyone, right? Like there's so many apps, there's so many tools. Like you can sort of whip something out that's better than the old papyrus brochures at like the local restaurant. Why does good design?
I think that the definition of good design has had to change, and I think that it is not solely about how the thing looks, but it has to do with like measurable results to whatever your objective is. And that's been a frustration of mine with the formal design community in the United States for a long time, because as design has evolved, and like, I went to graduate school for design, and the big part of graduate school is all about research-based design. And so the way in which, I mean, this is like almost 10 years ago, but the way in which for me, that my perception is in the design community, it comes from a place of insecurity. It's like, well, design is so important, and here's why. And like, we do these research practices, and they're based in various social science research methodologies, behavioral, et cetera. And, you do things that are like focus groups from like the more traditional marketing standpoint, or, more academic things to get your point across. And so the argument in the greater design community in the US has been that for a while. But then interestingly, what's celebrated in all of the design annuals and magazines and blogs and so forth, which I've like entirely given up on reading at this point, is like, hey, here's the hip, cool new thing that's just like visually pretty. And so it's always like, well, seems like this real big disconnect, because what you're celebrating in the community is like these, I mean, they're beautiful, they're amazing, et cetera. But it's like, well, yeah, but then you're talking about like the value of design in terms of like it's, these research practices and how to like get deep and how to have this narrative component and all these things. It's like, well, why aren't you celebrating that? Why isn't that like at the forefront of the field? And so for that and like a handful of other reasons, like I've kind of, I've just sort of stepped away from the general graphic design community. I mean, I don't have any ill will or resentment towards it, but it's just like, I just doesn't feel like it represents me or the direction that I want GFDA to go. How's that for quick?
Yeah. That was good. So it sounds like it sort of has to do with like the intersection of form and function.
For
it
sure.
Can't just
for
be
sure.
one or the
yeah.
other. That's super cool. What is your favorite emoji?
Favorite emoji. I don't know. Let's look at my phone. See what have I used recently.
Are you not an emoji guy, or you are? And just
closer to not an emoji guy, but I do use them. I probably, let's see. I use the little like celebration, like confetti thing a lot.
Yeah.
And the laughing, crying one, but not the laughing, crying one that's sideways. There's too much emotion in that. Unless it is really funny.
That makes sense.
Yeah, we'll say those two.
Those are two good ones. I don't use the congratulations. I probably do use the sideways laughing, crying one too much. What has been a hard lesson you've had to learn with how you think about money?
Oh man, there's a couple things with this. I think the hard lesson that I've had to learn is how to think about money from a standpoint of like a compounding approach. And I don't necessarily mean like compounding interest, like, your high school teacher trying to convince you that you should, start your savings as soon as possible. I mean, in terms of like, okay, we've got this much liquid capital available to us right now. Like there are certain expenses that we need to account for. And then we're going to take a certain portion of this and like, quote unquote, invest it. And what are we going to invest it in? Like, okay, well, we're going to invest this in marketing, or we're going to invest this in collaboration, or we're going to invest this in our own products. And then saying like, okay, well, it's going to cost X amount. And then what do we stand to gain from this? And like, what's and then like, once we get that, like, what are some of the intangibles that we get alongside of it? Like, does that also help to increase our followers, or even just thinking like, or how to strategically do that? So it's like the Maison Kitsune thing. It's like, okay, well, they're going to invest a certain amount of money in it. We're going to invest a certain amount of money in it. Like how do we make sure that turns into more money, more followers, more engagement, more subscribers? Like what are all the components that we can put into place to make sure that this is a worthwhile investment, rather than thinking about money from the simple standpoint of like, I pay this, I get this back, and it's a very like flat kind of approach. And that is admittedly how I thought about the business for a long time. And I think also partly because it's a little bit of the conflict in my experience between service-based pricing and product-based pricing. And, that theoretically product is scalable and service is not at a certain point, because there's only so many hours in the day. And I also think that my friend Richie Norton says pricing is branding. He might not be the original person that said it, but he's the first person who said it that I remember. And so it's like constantly having the confidence to charge more for your services and for your products within reason. And you can tell even the fact that I have to add that within reason, there's like a little bit of hesitancy there. But also like as more money theoretically comes in, then, when the opportunities to do things that maybe are not as profitable present themselves, it's like you still feel comfortable being able to do that because it's like, okay, I'm really passionate about this, and thank God I charged that pain in the ass client, what I needed to charge them, because now I can do this thing that I'm really excited about and, I'm not going to really earn a whole lot of money on.
Right. No, that totally makes sense. What is your favorite TV show?
Favorite TV show? Can I name a few? Or do I have to pick one?
Sure, you can name anything.
I was just seeing how strict the rules are here.
What's if you were going to flip something on?
We watch a lot of Top Gear / Grand Tour. And I'm not even necessarily I'm not a huge car guy, but I find that those shows highly entertaining. I like all of the presenters there. I like Clarkson's Farm. I love Amazon did James May, Our Man in Japan, and since I'm a huge Japanophile, that was such a great show to watch. And that also came a few months after my fiance and I just got back from a trip to Japan. So really enjoyed that. And I haven't finished season 4 yet, but the martial arts thing, I love Cobra Kai. To be cliche.
That's awesome. Hey, nothing wrong with that. Last two. What is your favorite dish at your favorite restaurant?
Favorite dish, favorite restaurant. Let's see. So the Chinese restaurant that I mentioned that I haven't been to in a while because it was making me fat, but it was really fucking good. The name of the restaurant was Chengdu Gourmet, and they were. I love Szechuan cuisine. I love spicy food, and so my favorite dish there was a dish called Chongqing chicken, which is fried chicken with Szechuan peppercorns, and there's some cilantro and garlic, and man, I just ate the shit out of that so many times during the week. Yeah, and then I love sushi. Unfortunately, my favorite sushi restaurant closed due to COVID. But it would be hard for me to pick something from that restaurant because a lot of times when we would go, we would get a omakase. So it's whatever their seasonal chef's tasting was kind of we'd go there for special events, whatever anniversary, etc. So that was always changing, but yeah.
That's awesome. What last one? What is your biggest obstacle?
The easy answer to that is myself. In so many ways, it's man, it is so apparent to me from a business perspective, and I've also found this in as I continue to study and train in the martial arts. The problem is always me. You hear that a lot, when you're younger, I guess, or maybe you just hear it all the time. I don't know. I haven't been old yet to know. But the depth of how true that is continues to, unfortunately, reveal itself to me daily. And in martial arts, it's been interesting. And for me, because martial arts, and maybe we could talk about this in our next conversation in some depth, but because I've studied martial arts so much and it's such a passion for me, it influences everything I do. When I left to go to college, when I went to Kent State for undergrad, I took the passion that I had for martial arts in the first couple of years of when I was in high school and so forth. And I'm okay, now I know how to passionately pursue something. I'm going to do that to my design practice. And then my design practice in college, I learned how to practice really diligently. And so then I brought that back to my martial arts. And so for a long time early on, it was this interplay back and forth of those two things. But so anyways, I tend to view a lot of stuff through the lessons that I learn in martial arts. And as at this point, 22 years in, it gets harder to articulate that to somebody else necessarily. But anytime you're trying to do apply a technique to somebody else, let's say you're trying to put somebody in an arm bar and do a joint lock or a throw or something, and it's not working out, the first thing is like, oh, well, it's the other person's fault, or there's something they're not doing right, especially if they're trying to work with you cooperatively to like learn or practice something. But like the more and more that I have experience, it's like, oh no, actually it's my problem. And it's like, if the person can resist your technique, then it's actually a problem that you have. Like it's tension in your body or your structure that's inhibiting you from being able to accomplish this in a seemingly effortless way, regardless of what the other person is. And so with like the martial arts practice, for a while now, I've kind of just constantly put myself into a state of like, if this doesn't work, it's always my fault. It's always my fault. And it's just kind of arriving back at that. And, sort of having that initial experience there. And then like, I kind of bring it back to the business. It's like, okay, whatever this problem is, it's like, even as much as I complain about not being able to do advertising or whatever, like there's something that I'm getting in the way of or not doing properly that needs to be addressed. And like, that's what I need to fix. So, yeah, like I said, that's the painful truth of that is like a daily occurrence for me. Like, fuck, that's my fault.
That's such a good answer.